You wrote at Salon this week that Republicans seem to have a strategy of promoting Kavanaugh not as a hard right jurist here, but actually as a champion of women, of progressive issues, including a fight for equal rights for women. How did that work out? Did anybody buy what Kavanaugh and the Republicans were selling along those lines this week?
Well, I have to assume conservatives don't buy it, or they would be balking at this nomination, right? If you were a space alien and you just dropped in and were watching these Senate hearings for God only knows what reason, you would get the impression that the Republicans think of Brett Kavanaugh as a liberal lion.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
all they do is they talk about how anti-racist he is, how pro-equality, the cases that he's ruled on that they've highlighted are the 3 or 4 extremely rare ones where he sided with working people or oppressed people or people, trying to get health care or anything like that. Again, the tiny minority of his cases, they barely go a minute without talking about how much he loves women and how he's practically a feminist and he's hired all these female law clerks and whatnot. It's been kind of surreal because obviously they don't believe a word of it, because if they actually thought he was any of the things they were presenting him as, they wouldn't have nominated him.
Right. Yeah.
And obviously there's no indication that the Democrats believe any of this either, As the days have gone on, the Senate Democrats have gotten fiercer and fiercer and less patient in their questioning of Kavanaugh. They've basically been accusing him of being a far-right jurist, which is accurate. I don't think they really pulled their punches, some more than others, but even Dianne Feinstein was particularly aggressive in painting him as a threat to women's health and safety, which he is.
You write that Kavanaugh had explained at length historically that abortion rights specifically had been reaffirmed many times in the Supreme Court's history, but he failed to explain how he felt about it. That sounds similar to him telling Senator Susan Collins of Maine during his meeting with her that he believed Roe v. Wade was settled law, but he seems to have failed to mention that the Supreme Court can very easily, very simply overturn settled law anytime. As you heard in that clip with Kamala Harris, his approach seems more akin to the Republican activist that he spent years as versus a legitimate legal thinker. Am I right about that? Is there any reason to believe at this point he is anything but an activist on these issues? And I guess the second part of that question is it possible that someone like Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski could possibly believe his nonsense about settled law?
Yeah, I mean, he's using the same rhetorical trick that other Republican justices have used in the past, which is if you ask them how they're going to vote on abortion rights, they launch into a history lecture about the history of abortion rights. It's akin to me, if you ask me who I'm going to vote for president, and I said, well, the current president is a Republican. It's basically the same thing.
Not saying who you're going to vote for, just making some observation and
and hoping that implies
right, that you're going to vote Republican.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous, but what he does is he just does it every single time you ask him, and eventually people give up. And that's what he's trying to do, is imply that he's going to uphold Roe. He clearly has no intention of doing it. That's why the leaked emails were such a big deal. I think that one thing that reproductive rights activists have been highlighting all this week, and some feminist journalists, is that Kavanaugh's views on these issues are not about being pro-life at all. I think a lot of people hide behind that, and they say it's about fetal life and whatnot. But he used language during a moment when Ted Cruz was asking him questions where he stigmatized the use of contraception by calling it abortion-inducing drugs, which is flatly false. And that's an anti-choice term. That's a religious right term that's used to to stigmatize women who use the birth control pill, IUDs, and other female-controlled kinds of contraception by equating the prevention of pregnancy with the termination of pregnancy. And I think that really kind of drives home here that, like, Kavanaugh's views on these issues aren't really rooted in some kind of, like, precious attitude about fetal life, but really are about this notion that women can't be trusted to make their own decisions. And the other thing I would say on that is, and I reported on this at Salon, is there is a case from a few years back where Kavanaugh was actually asked to rule on a case that involved three women that were disabled that the government had forced medical procedures on them without consulting them. Mm. And two of the women had been forced to have abortions against their will. And Kavanaugh ruled in favor of the government. He ruled against these women. So again, I cannot underline enough that this is about the fact that he just does not see women as the custodians of their bodies.
He also was using the right-wing phrase throughout the week, abortion on demand. Senator Richard Blumenthal attempted to call him out on that for it. What's wrong with that phrase? And what does it actually tell us about Kavanaugh's mindset here? Is that the same thing? I mean, does it just underscore that he is not a legal thinker here, but as much as a Republican activist on these issues? I mean, that's a half a breath away from Rush Limbaugh's drive-by abortions phrase, frankly, it seems to me.
Yeah, exactly. That phrase is a meaningless phrase, and anti-choicers use it because they want to invoke misogynist stereotypes about women making demands. They want to imply that women who have abortions are demanding unreasonable B words, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just ridiculous. Nobody says, wisdom tooth extractions on demand. Nobody right. says vaccines on demand. I mean, abortion is given out in the same way that all other medical procedures are given out. You consult with a medical professional. You make that determination with, the help of a medical professional. You don't just walk into the store and ask for an abortion.
Has Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, they both have previously said they would not seat someone on the court who would be the vote to overturn Roe v. Wade, but both seem to be pretty open to seating Kavanaugh. Neither of these women are on the Senate Judiciary Committee, so we haven't gotten to hear from them this week. But have you seen or heard any response from either of their offices, if any of the testimony this week may have moved them one way or another in their thinking?
No, I don't think that there's any reason to expect that they're going to respond till the confirmation hearings are over, if they were going to. I would say this. These hearings are in a lot of ways and should be understood as an elaborate theater to give Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski cover to claim that they're pro-choice while voting essentially to overturn Roe versus Wade. The whole charade that they're doing around Kavanaugh, trying to use these bad faith arguments to pretend that he's not going to immediately vote against abortion rights the first chance he gets, that's all just so that they can go back to their voters and say, well, he told me he thought Roe was settled law. How was I supposed to know? I don't even know how effective that is, but that's the whole point of this entire charade. Some pro-choice organizations are running ads this weekend in newspapers in Maine and Alaska highlighting the email where Kavanaugh reveals his true feelings about Roe, saying it's not settled law. And hopefully that pressure campaign will have some effect.